Whispers of the River. Chapter 1. The Quiet Town. Millbrook, Virginia, sat cradled by the Blue Ridge Mountains, a postcard town whose streets seemed untouched by time. The rhythm of life here was measured not in stock markets or deadlines, but in church bells, the rustle of leaves in autumn, and the low murmur of the river that ran through its center. For Daniel Whitmore, the river was more than a landmark. It was a reminder of constancy. Everything else in his life seemed to be shifting beneath his feet since his retirement, but the water always flowed steady, always whispered the same song. He often thought the river understood him better than most people. Daniel was 58, though the lines on his face suggested a man who had weathered more than his fair share of storms. A firefighter for over 30 years, he had lived through smoke, fire, collapse, and chaos, carrying bodies from burning buildings and comforting families as their worlds turned to ash. Those memories clung to him like soot that couldn't be washed away. His retirement party, 3 years ago, had been loud and full of laughter. Old colleagues clapped him on the back, beer flowed, and speeches were made about his bravery. They called him a hero that night. But when the echoes of applause faded, when the station doors closed without him walking back through them, silence became his new companion. Retirement wasn't what he'd pictured. He thought he'd feel relief. Instead, he felt hollow. Each morning, he woke up before dawn, as if an alarm bell still rang inside him. He'd brew his coffee, stare out the kitchen window at the dew settling on the grass, and wonder what to do with the long stretch of hours ahead. His wife, Margaret, had passed away 5 years earlier. Pancreatic cancer that moved faster than either of them could comprehend. Since then, the house felt too big, the rooms too empty. Their daughter, Rachel, lived 2 states away in North Carolina, busy with her career in education and raising 2 children of her own. She called often, visited when she could, but Daniel never wanted to burden her with his loneliness. On Saturdays, he walked the Millbrook River Trail. It was his ritual, his tether to the world. The trail curved around tall oaks and followed the water's edge, offering benches for those who needed to pause. Today, a cool mist clung to the surface, blurring the reflection of the trees. Daniel leaned on his cane, more for comfort than necessity, and settled on his favorite bench. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his leather notebook. Its cover was worn, its pages mostly blank. He'd started it after Margaret's death, intending to write his thoughts, maybe even a memoir someday. But words failed him. What could he possibly say that would ease the silence? "Morning, Mr. Whitmore," a voice chirped. Daniel looked up. A boy no older than 12 stood with a fishing pole in one hand and a tackle box in the other. His baseball cap was too big, sliding down over his ears. Daniel recognized him, Eli Thompson, the grandson of his neighbor. "Morning, Eli," Daniel replied with a small smile. "Catching anything today?" "Not yet. Dad says the fish bite better after 9. The boy grinned and hurried down the bank. Daniel watched him for a while, a flicker of warmth breaking through his solitude. He remembered taking Rachel fishing when she was Eli's age, her squeals of excitement whenever she caught something small enough to fit in her palm. Memory tightened in his chest, bittersweet. As the river carried its quiet tune, Daniel felt the tug of something he couldn't name. Restlessness, maybe, or the whisper of change. He didn't know it yet, but this morning marked the start of something new, something that would test him, heal him, and force him to confront the past he'd tried to bury. The first sign of change came that afternoon. Daniel had driven into town for groceries, his list tucked neatly into his wallet. The aisles of Millbrook Market were familiar. Canned goods on the left, produce on the right. Mrs. Donovan always at the bakery counter offering samples of her sweet rolls. Daniel Whitmore! Mrs. Donovan waved him over, her flour-dusted apron tied loosely around her waist. Haven't seen you in a while. Been keeping to myself, Daniel said, offering a polite smile. Well, don't keep too long. Folks around here like seeing your face. She handed him a warm cinnamon roll wrapped in wax paper. On the house. Daniel thanked her, touched by the small gesture. It was one of the things about Millbrook. People noticed when you were around, and they noticed when you weren't. As he pushed his cart toward the dairy section, a voice behind him said, "Excuse me, sorry, I didn't mean to block the aisle." Daniel turned. A woman stood there, about his age, maybe a little younger. She had dark auburn hair streaked with gray, pulled back loosely, and eyes the color of amber. She wore a simple denim jacket over a cream-colored blouse. Her smile was apologetic, but warm. "No problem," Daniel said, stepping aside. She lingered a moment longer than necessary. "You're Daniel, right? Retired firefighter?" Daniel's brow furrowed. "Yes? Do I know you?" "I'm Claire Henderson. I just moved back to Millbrook a few months ago. We went to high school together." The name rang faintly in his memory. He studied her face, and beneath the years caught a glimpse of familiarity. Claire Henderson, the girl who played piano in the school auditorium, the one everyone said had a voice like honey. "Claire," Daniel said slowly, as though tasting the word. "It's been a long time." She laughed softly. 40 years, give or take." They stood there, two people bound by the invisible thread of shared history, staring at each other in the dairy aisle. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something stir inside him. Not adrenaline, not sorrow, but possibility. That evening, Daniel sat at his kitchen table, the cinnamon roll half-eaten on a plate, his notebook open before him. For once, the page did not feel so empty. He picked up his pen and wrote 3 words in careful script. "I saw Claire." He stared at the words as if they held a weight he couldn't yet define. Something was shifting. He didn't know where it would lead, but he sensed that the river of his life had just met a new current. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt curious about tomorrow. The next morning, Daniel woke earlier than usual. The memory of seeing Claire at the grocery store drifted through his mind like a half-forgotten song. He brewed his coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the notebook where he had scribbled, "I saw Claire." It felt strange to care about something again, even if it was as simple as bumping into an old classmate. For years, life had been about getting through the day, surviving the silence, and fighting off the weight of memories. But now, curiosity nudged him. Who was Claire now? What had brought her back to Millbrook after all this time? He shook his head at himself, muttering, "Don't be ridiculous, Dan." But his heart beat with a little more energy than usual. That afternoon, Daniel headed into town again, though he didn't need more groceries. He told himself he was just running errands, maybe stopping by the hardware store. But he found himself walking past the Millbrook Cafe, a small brick-front diner where locals gathered for coffee and gossip. Through the window, he spotted Claire sitting alone at a corner table, a steaming mug in front of her, and a leather-bound book open beside it. She was scribbling notes in the margins with a focused expression. Before he could second-guess himself, he pushed open the door. The bell above jingled, drawing a few glances. The air smelled of bacon, maple syrup, and fresh brewed coffee. Claire looked up. Her face brightened. "Daniel, twice in 2 days! That's a record!" He chuckled awkwardly. "Mind if I join you?" "Please." She gestured to the chair across from her. Daniel slid into the chair, suddenly aware of how long it had been since he'd sat across from a woman in the cafe. He cleared his throat. "So you're back in town for good?" "Yes. After my divorce, I needed a change. Millbrook seemed the right place to start over." Divorce, the word hung in the air, softened only by her calm delivery. "I'm sorry," Daniel said gently. "Don't be. It was a long time coming." She sipped her coffee, then tilted her head at him. "And you, retired life, treating you well?" Daniel hesitated, then gave the honest answer. "Not exactly. Feels like I left all my purpose at the firehouse." She studied him for a moment, her amber eyes thoughtful. "I think a lot of us feel that way when one chapter ends. The trick is figuring out the next one." Her words struck him more deeply than he expected. They talked for nearly an hour. About the town, about music. She still played piano, sometimes at the church, and about how different life looked at their age. Daniel found himself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in months. When they finally stood to leave, Claire touched his arm lightly. "It was good to see you, Daniel. Maybe we could do this again sometime." He nodded, heart beating faster than he wanted to admit. "I'd like that." Walking home, Daniel felt lighter. The sun slanted across the rooftops, and children's voices carried from the park. For the first time in a long while, he didn't dread the empty house waiting for him. That night, he opened his notebook again and wrote, "She wants to meet again. Maybe I do, too." He stared at the sentence until his eyelids grew heavy. For years, he had carried grief like a shield, protecting himself from hope. But now, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he was ready to lay it down. The week unfolded differently. Daniel found himself checking the cafe whenever he went into town, half hoping to see Claire. On Wednesday, he spotted her again, this time with a group of women from the church. She caught his eye and gave him a small wave. On Friday, he mustered the courage to call her. He'd found her number in the local directory. They agreed to meet on Saturday morning at the river trail. The morning was crisp, the air scented with pine and wet earth. Daniel arrived early, nervous in a way he hadn't been since he was a teenager. When Claire arrived, wearing a soft blue scarf and carrying a thermos of coffee, his heart lifted. "Thought we could walk a bit," she said, smiling. As they strolled along the river, Daniel felt something shift. The silence between them wasn't heavy, it was comfortable. She asked him about his years as a firefighter, about the moments that still haunt him. For reasons he couldn't explain, he told her things he rarely shared, and she listened, really listened, without judgment, without pity. At one point, they stopped by the old wooden bench. Claire sat down, watching the river glide past. She said, "Funny, I used to come here as a teenager to write songs. I thought the river carried secrets if you listened long enough." Daniel chuckled. "Maybe it still does." They sat side by side in easy silence, the water whispering below. For Daniel, it felt like the first step into something new, a current pulling him forward. By the end of that day, Daniel's notebook held more words than it had in years. He wrote about Claire's laugh, about the way the sunlight caught her hair, about how he felt less like a ghost when she was around. For the first time since Margaret's death, Daniel dared to imagine that maybe his story wasn't over. Not yet. Chapter 2. Echoes of the Past. The following weeks unfolded like pages Daniel hadn't expected to read again. For years, his life had been measured in quiet mornings and long, lonely nights. Now there were conversations, walks, and the occasional shared meal with Claire. Sometimes they simply sat by the river, not needing to fill the air with words. Daniel found those silences the most surprising. With her, quiet felt like comfort, not emptiness. But for every new moment, there were echoes of the past that lingered. One evening, as Daniel sorted through an old box of belongings in the attic, he stumbled upon a faded photograph. It showed him in uniform, arms slung around two fellow firefighters, their faces smudged with ash but smiling broadly. Behind them, smoke curled from the roof of a half-burned building. Daniel sat back on his heels, staring at the photo. One of the men, Mark Jennings, had been his closest friend. Mark had died in a warehouse fire nearly 15 years ago, trapped under falling beams. Daniel had been there that night, helpless as the flames swallowed his brother in arms. The guilt never left him. He slipped the photo into his notebook, as though carrying it might force him to reckon with the past he tried to ignore. The next Saturday, Daniel and Claire met again at the trail. As they walked, Claire asked gently, "You've been quiet today. Something on your mind?" Daniel hesitated, fingers brushing the notebook in his pocket. "Just old memories, things I can't quite shake." Claire gave him a sidelong glance. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." "No, I think maybe I do." His voice was low, rough. "I lost a friend on the job, years ago, Mark Jennings. He was like a brother to me. I should have been able to get him out, but I couldn't." Claire stopped walking. Her eyes softened. "Daniel, I can't imagine the weight you've carried. But sometimes tragedy isn't ours to prevent. Sometimes it's just what happens no matter how hard we fight." Her words struck him, not because they erased the guilt, but because they offered a kind of grace he hadn't given himself. They stood by the river for a long moment, the sound of water filling the silence. Daniel felt the faintest sense of release, as though a knot inside him had loosened. A few days later, Claire invited him to her house for dinner. She lived in a modest white farmhouse on the edge of town, its porch lined with potted plants. Inside, the room smelled of rosemary and garlic, with soft piano music playing from an old record player. "I hope you like chicken," she said, setting a dish on the table. "I've eaten worse," Daniel joked, easing into the chair. Over dinner, conversation flowed easily. She told him about her years in Richmond, about raising two kids now grown and scattered across the country. He shared stories, some light, some heavy, from the firehouse. They laughed, but there were quiet moments, too, when their eyes lingered a little longer than necessary. Afterward, Claire poured them each a glass of wine. She nodded toward the piano in the corner. "Do you still like music?" Daniel shrugged. "I was never much of a musician." "Doesn't matter. Music isn't about skill. It's about feeling." She sat at the piano, fingers gliding across the keys. The melody was gentle, wistful, filling the room with warmth. Daniel closed his eyes, letting the notes wash over him. For the first time in years, he felt something crack open inside him. Not grief, not loneliness, but a tender ache of possibility. When the song ended, he whispered, "That was beautiful." Claire smiled softly. "Thank you. Music has always been where I find myself." Daniel wanted to tell her that he was starting to find himself in her presence too, but the words stuck in his throat. That night, back in his quiet house, Daniel opened his notebook and wrote, "The past will always echo, but maybe the future can sing too." As autumn deepened, the trees along the river turned shades of gold and crimson. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of wood smoke. Daniel and Claire's paths intertwined more and more, sometimes planned, sometimes by chance. But the deeper their connection grew, the more Daniel felt Margaret's shadow lingering. He had loved his wife deeply, fiercely. The thought of moving on, of opening his heart again, felt like a betrayal. One evening, sitting on his porch with a blanket around his shoulders, he spoke aloud to the night sky. "Maggie, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if it's right to feel this again." His voice broke. "But I miss you. God, I miss you." The stars offered no answers, but somewhere in his heart he wondered if Margaret would want him to find peace, to keep living, instead of drowning in sorrow. The river kept flowing, steady and sure, as if reminding him that life too had to move forward. By late October, Daniel and Claire had become a familiar pair in town. People noticed. Mrs. Donovan from the bakery teased him one morning, saying, "Well, well, Mr. Whittemore, looks like someone's found his smile again." He flushed, but he didn't deny it. Still, the path ahead wasn't simple. The past didn't vanish overnight, and the heart had a way of holding on to old wounds. But for the first time in years, Daniel felt as though he wasn't walking alone. And that, he realized, was enough to keep going. The first frost of the season arrived in Millbrook on a quiet Thursday morning. Daniel stepped out onto his porch, breath puffing white in the cold, and noticed the thin sheen of ice on the bird bath. He drew his jacket tighter, feeling the chill settle deep into his bones. That day, Claire called. "Daniel, I was thinking, would you come with me to the Harvest Festival this weekend?" He hesitated. Festivals were Margaret's thing. She loved the booths, apple cider, the hay rides. Daniel had avoided them in recent years, the memories too sharp. But something in Claire's voice coaxed him. "Sure," he said. "I'd like that." The Millbrook Harvest Festival was a yearly tradition. The town square filled with vendor tents, children ran with painted faces, and the scent of kettle corn and barbecue drifted through the crisp autumn air. A band played folk tunes on the main stage, while couples danced in front of them, boots scuffing the cobblestones. At one stall, a local photographer displayed black and white images of Millbrook through the decades. Daniel stopped short at one particular photo, the firehouse in 1990, a younger version of himself standing proudly in front with his crew. Mark Jennings was there too, grinning with his arm around Daniel's shoulder. Claire touched his sleeve gently. "That's you, isn't it?" "Yeah," he whispered. The memory surged, bittersweet. "You look proud," she said softly. "I was. We all were. We thought we could take on the world. I didn't realize how much it would take from us." Claire didn't press. She just slipped her hand into his, a quiet gesture that steadied him. As evening fell, lanterns lit the square, casting golden light over the festivities. A slow song began on stage, and couples drifted toward the dance floor. Claire glanced at Daniel. "Do you dance?" "I not well," he admitted. "Good. Neither do I." She tugged him toward the music before he could protest. They swayed awkwardly at first, then more easily as the rhythm carried them. Daniel felt the warmth of her hand in his, the nearness of her smile, and for a fleeting moment the weight of grief lifted. He realized something startling. He was happy, truly, unexpectedly happy. Later that night, back in his house, Daniel couldn't sleep. He paced the living room, his notebook open on the coffee table, his pen scratched across the page. Is it wrong to feel this? To want more time, more moments with someone new? He set the pen down, rubbing his temples. The guilt of moving forward warred with the yearning to live again. He whispered into the stillness, as if Margaret could hear him. "I'll never stop loving you, but maybe love isn't meant to be only once in a lifetime." The silence gave no answer, but his heart felt a fraction lighter. The next week, Daniel found himself drawn deeper into Claire's world. She invited him to join her for Sunday service at the small Methodist church. Daniel hadn't been a regular churchgoer since his childhood, but he agreed. Inside the old stone building, sunlight streamed through stained glass, painting the pews with colors. Claire played the piano during the service, her music filling the sanctuary. Daniel sat in the back, watching her fingers glide across the keys, listening to the congregation sing. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like an outsider looking in. Afterward, as they lingered near the steps, an older gentleman approached. "Mr. Whittemore, is that you?" Daniel blinked. "Mr. Harlan?" The man chuckled. "Haven't seen you since the firehouse fundraiser back in the 90s. Heard you retired. Good for you." They exchanged a few pleasantries before Mr. Harlan wandered off. But the encounter stirred something in Daniel. The past wasn't gone. It lived here, in the town, in the people who remembered. And maybe facing it was part of healing. Over the following days, Daniel and Claire grew closer. They shared stories not just of triumphs, but of failures, regrets, and dreams they once thought too late to chase. Claire admitted she had always wanted to open a small music school, a place where kids in town could learn piano and voice without their parents driving hours to the city. "But it's just a dream," she said with a shrug. "Why just a dream?" Daniel asked. She smiled faintly. "Because I don't know if I have the courage to start over." I understood. He too was learning that starting over required a different kind of bravery than running into burning buildings. One evening, as they walked by the river, Claire paused, gazing at the water. "You know, Dan, I used to think life ended when love ended. When my marriage fell apart, I believed that was it, that I would never feel whole again." Daniel studied her profile, the way the fading sunlight traced her features. "And now?" he asked. She turned to him, eyes glistening. "Now? I'm not so sure." The air between them shifted. Daniel's heart pounded as he realized how close they stood. He wanted to lean in, to close the distance, but fear held him back. Fear of betraying Margaret, fear of moving too fast, fear of losing what he'd just begun to find. Instead, he took her hand. "I don't know where this goes," he admitted, "but I'd like to find out." Claire squeezed his hand, her smile tender. "So would I." That night, Daniel didn't write in his notebook. He didn't need to. The words lived inside him now, carried like the steady current of the river. For the first time in years, he believed in tomorrow. Long while, yeah. But even as Daniel leaned into the newness with Claire, he struggled with guilt. One evening, Rachel called from North Carolina. "Dad," she said after their usual small talk, "I heard from Mrs. Donovan that you've been spending time with someone, a woman named Claire." Daniel froze. In a town like Millbrook, news traveled faster than wind. "Yeah," he said slowly. "We've been seeing each other. Nothing serious yet." Rachel was quiet for a beat. "I'm glad you're not alone anymore. Mom would want that." Her words pierced him. "You think so?" "I know so," Rachel said firmly. "Mom hated seeing you sad. If someone makes you smile again, you shouldn't feel guilty about it." Daniel swallowed hard, emotion catching in his throat. His daughter's blessing was something he didn't realize he'd been waiting for. The new year arrived with fireworks bursting over Millbrook, their colors reflecting on the icy river. Daniel and Claire stood together on her porch, wrapped in coats and scarves, watching the sky. When the final burst faded and the night grew quiet again, Claire turned to him. "Daniel, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever think about what comes next? For you? For us?" The question hung in the air, heavier than snow. Daniel took a long breath. "I think about it all the time, and I'm scared, because I don't know if I can give enough or be enough after everything." Claire reached for his hand. You already are enough, just as you are. Her words landed like a promise, steadying him. For the first time, Daniel let himself imagine a future that wasn't just about surviving, but about living. Yet as the weeks of winter wore on, challenges arose. Daniel's body reminded him daily of years spent running into danger, aches in his knees, stiffness in his back. Some mornings getting out of bed felt like dragging weights. One particularly cold morning, while shoveling his own driveway, he slipped on ice and landed hard on his hip. Pain shot through him, sharp and unrelenting. Rachel rushed over when he called, helping him into the house. "You stubborn man," she scolded gently as she brought him an ice pack. "You should have waited for me." "I've never been good at waiting." "Then maybe it's time you learned," she said, her tone softening. As he sat there, hip throbbing, Daniel realized that growing older wasn't just about aches and pains, it was about accepting help, something he'd never been good at. Claire's steady presence, her care without judgment, reminded him that vulnerability wasn't weakness. One snowy evening, as they sat by the fireplace in Claire's living room, she pulled out a stack of sheet music. "I've been thinking," she said, "about starting that music school I told you about. Maybe here, in town, just a few lessons to start." Daniel studied her. "What's stopping you?" She laughed nervously. "Fear. What if no one signs up? What if I fail?" Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady. "You ran away from a life that didn't fit anymore. You started over. That takes courage. This is just the next step, and if you fall, you won't be alone." Claire's eyes softened. "You really believe that?" "I do." In that moment, Daniel realized something. Encouraging her gave him courage too. Her dream reminded him that it wasn't too late to chase something new. As winter began to loosen its grip, the river thawed, its current growing stronger. Daniel felt the same shift within himself. The crossroads of his life stretched before him, to remain bound to the past or to step into a future with Claire. And for the first time, he leaned toward the future. Chapter 4. The Fire Within. Spring crept slowly into Millbrook. Snow melted into rivulets that fed the swollen river, and crocuses pushed their way stubbornly through the thawing earth. The town shook off its winter quiet, porches filled again with rocking chairs, and children biked down the sidewalks, their laughter echoing off the houses. For Daniel, spring meant a second chance at life. His hip had healed from the fall, though stiff on cold mornings, and Claire's presence had woven itself into his days like sunlight filtering through curtains. He wasn't lonely anymore, though loneliness still shadowed him in quiet hours. The river trail, once barren with ice, now welcomed them with greening trees and the chatter of robins. Daniel and Claire walked there often, their steps in rhythm, their conversations drifting between past memories and new possibilities. One afternoon, as they paused by the bench, Claire said, "I've done it." "Done what?" Daniel asked, lowering himself onto the wooden slats. "I put out flyers for the community center. The community center gave me a room 2 evenings a week." Her voice trembled with excitement and nerves. Daniel's face broke into a grin. "Claire, that's wonderful." "Or it's a disaster waiting to happen," she said, half laughing, half panicked. He shook his head. "No, this is you finding your song again." She smiled, and Daniel thought how beautiful courage looked on her. The first night of lessons, Daniel insisted on walking her to the community center. Inside, a few children and one teenager sat nervously with borrowed keyboards and sheet music. Claire greeted them warmly, her natural ease quickly filling the room with comfort. Daniel watched from the back, unnoticed. As her fingers danced over the piano keys, teaching simple scales, he saw her come alive. It was as though music lit her from within, and the children responded with bright eyes and eager hands. Afterwards, as they locked up, Claire said breathlessly, "I think it might work." Daniel squeezed her hand. "I know it will." In her courage, he found his reflection. But just as spring promises growth, it also uncovers storms. One evening, while Daniel sat at home jotting in his notebook, the distant sound of sirens pierced the night. His chest tightened instantly. Even 3 years into retirement, the sound triggered every instinct in him. He grabbed his coat and drove toward the glow he saw against the sky. A barn on the outskirts of town was ablaze, flames licking high into the darkness. Fire engines crowded the field, volunteers rushing with hoses. Daniel pulled over, heart pounding, watching as the crew battled the inferno. "Whitmore!" someone shouted. It was Chief Alvarez, who had taken over after Daniel retired. "We could use another set of hands." For a moment, Daniel froze. He wasn't a firefighter anymore. His body wasn't as strong, his knees not as steady. But the fire roared, and instinct overpowered doubt. He pulled on a spare jacket, grabbed a hose, and joined the line. Smoke filled his lungs, heat pressed against his skin, and adrenaline surged through him like it used to. Together, they fought the flames until the structure groaned and collapsed inward, sparks showering the night. When the fire was finally out, Daniel stood covered in soot, chest heaving, every muscle aching. Chief Alvarez clapped him on the shoulder. "Still got it, old man." He managed a weary grin, but deep down, fear gnawed at him. He wasn't invincible anymore. The fire reminded him not just of who he had been, but of who he no longer was. Claire arrived minutes later, rushing toward him. "Daniel, what were you thinking?" He coughed, voice hoarse. "I was thinking people needed help." Her eyes filled with tears, half from relief, half from anger. "You could have been killed. You're not 25 anymore." He didn't argue. He knew she was right. His body screamed the truth. That night, lying in bed, bruises blooming across his ribs, Daniel faced the hardest reality. He couldn't go back. The firehouse wasn't his home anymore. His place was here, with Claire, with whatever future waited. He had to let the past burn out. The weeks that followed tested him. The town praised his bravery, but Daniel felt no pride, only a sobering reminder of his limits. He grew quieter, withdrawing even from Claire. She noticed, of course. One evening, she came to his porch, standing with arms folded. "Talk to me, Daniel." He stared at the river beyond the yard. "I don't know who I am without the job, and when I tried to be that man again, my body reminded me I can't." She stepped closer, voice firm but gentle. "You're more than the badge you wore. You're more than the fires you fought. You're a man who still has stories to live, people to love, and purpose to find. Don't let one chapter define the whole book." Her words sank deep, though the struggle didn't vanish overnight. Healing wasn't tidy. But Daniel began to believe her, slowly. As summer approached, Claire's music program blossomed. Children giggled as they plunked out scales. Teenagers shyly sang notes that grew stronger each week. Daniel often sat in the back, quietly watching, sometimes fixing a squeaky chair or carrying boxes of sheet music. He wasn't on the front lines anymore, but he was still useful. One night after class, a boy named Eli, the same one who used to fish by the river, shyly handed Claire a drawing of a piano surrounded by musical notes. "For you," he mumbled. Claire beamed, hugging the drawing to her chest. "Thank you, Eli. This means more than you know." Daniel watched her eyes shine, and in that moment he saw the future, not just hers, but theirs. Still, life had one more test waiting. Late in July, Daniel received a call from Rachel. Her voice trembled. "Dad, I need you. Can you come to North Carolina? Tom's job moved him overseas for a few months, and the kids, it's just overwhelming. I could use some help." Daniel's heart twisted. Rachel rarely asked for anything. "I'll be there," he promised. When he told Claire, her face was unreadable at first. Then she nodded. "Your family needs you. You should go." "I don't want to leave you," Daniel admitted. "You're not leaving," she said softly. "You're just going where you're needed. That's who you are." Her faith in him gave him strength. But as he packed his bag, Daniel wondered, could their fragile new love survive distance? Could he balance being the father his daughter needed with the man Claire had come to rely on? The river whispered outside his window, as if reminding him life always flows forward. And so, with both hope and fear in his heart, Daniel prepared for the journey that might decide not just his future, but the future of them both. Chapter 5. The Current Carries Us. The morning Daniel left for North Carolina, Millbrook was wrapped in golden summer light. The river shimmered under the rising sun, and the world seemed almost too peaceful for the storm inside his chest. He loaded his old duffel bag into the back of the truck and turned to find Claire waiting on the porch. She wore a simple summer dress, her auburn hair tied loosely, the morning breeze teasing a strand across her cheek. In her hands was a small thermos. "Coffee," she said, holding it out. "For the road." Daniel took it, their fingers brushing. "You sure about this, me going?" Her eyes softened, though worry lingered there. "Rachel needs you. That's not something you can ignore. And I'll be here when you come back." He nodded, though his throat felt tight. They kissed, gentle, lingering, a promise more than a goodbye. Then Daniel climbed into the truck and drove away. The road stretched long and uncertain before him. North Carolina was hotter, busier. Rachel lived in a suburb outside Raleigh, where houses lined up in neat rows and children's toys cluttered the lawns. When Daniel arrived, she hugged him tightly, her usual guardedness cracked by exhaustion. "Dad, thank you," she whispered. Inside, the house buzzed with the chaos of 3 kids, homework scattered across the table, soccer cleats by the door, a toddler crying for attention. Daniel rolled up his sleeves and stepped in without hesitation. The days blurred into routines, cooking breakfast, walking the kids to school, helping with math problems he hadn't seen in decades, and tucking them in with stories. At night, he sat with Rachel on the porch, listening as she poured out her fears of doing it all alone. "You were always strong," she told him, "but even strong people need help." She leaned against him, silent tears tracing her cheeks. For the first time since Marlene's death, Daniel felt he was giving his daughter something more than advice. He was giving her presence. Still, he missed Claire fiercely. They spoke on the phone every night, her voice a tether across the miles. She told him about the music lessons, about Eli learning his first song, and how the river glowed in the evenings. And he told her about Rachel, about the grandkids, about the small victories of the day. Sometimes they fell silent, just breathing together, letting the sound of the other be enough. But the distance gnawed at him. Some nights he lay awake wondering if the fragile thread of their love could stretch without breaking. One Saturday, Rachel suggested they take the kids to a local park. The day was hot, cicadas buzzing in the trees, children laughing around the playground. Daniel sat on a bench, watching his grandchildren race down slides, when Rachel joined him. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course." Her eyes searched his face. "Do you ever think about finding someone again? Someone to share your life with?" Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "Why do you ask?" "Because I see the way you light up when you talk to Claire," Rachel said gently. "I used to worry you'd spend the rest of your life alone, but now you don't seem alone anymore." His heart swelled with both love and fear. "She's special, Rachel, but it's complicated." Rachel smiled faintly. "Life's always complicated, but if she makes you happy, then maybe that's enough." Her words stayed with him long after. Weeks turned into 2 months. By the time Tom returned from overseas, the children had grown accustomed to Daniel's steady presence, and Rachel seemed stronger, steadier. "Dad, thank you," she said the night before he left. "I don't know how I would have managed without you." He hugged her tightly. "You'll never have to. I'm always here." As he drove back toward Virginia, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter, but another weight pressed on his heart. Claire. Would she still be waiting? Would the time apart have dimmed what they had found? Millbrook appeared in the late afternoon light, the river glinting like an old friend welcoming him home. Daniel drove straight to the community center where Claire had said she'd be. Through the open doors came the sound of music. Dozens of voices, children singing, piano keys dancing. Daniel stepped inside quietly. On the stage, Claire stood before a group of children, conducting them with graceful hands. The room was filled with melody, laughter, and joy. She was radiant, alive in a way he had never seen. When the song ended, the children erupted in cheers. Claire turned, and her eyes found Daniel's at the back of the room. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. Then her face broke into a smile that lit the room brighter than the sun. Later, as the last children left, Claire walked towards him, wiping her hands on a handkerchief. "You're back." "I am," Daniel said softly. "You were gone a long time." "I know. Rachel needed me." He hesitated, then added, "But I needed you." Her eyes shimmered. "I didn't know if—" He stepped closer, taking her hands. "Claire, the whole time I was away, I realized something. The firehouse may be behind me, and Marlene will always be part of me. But you are my future, if you'll have me." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but her smile was steady. "Daniel Whitmore, I thought you'd never ask." And then, in the quiet hall, beneath the lingering echo of music, they kissed. A kiss not of beginnings, but of continuations, of second chances fully embraced. The months that followed wove their lives together like threads in a quilt. Claire's music program became a cornerstone of Millbrook, with parents and children flocking to her classes. Daniel found purpose in helping, repairing instruments, organizing recitals, even reading stories to the younger ones during breaks. At the river, their bench became a sacred place, where they talked, laughed, argued, and dreamed. Sometimes silence was enough, the steady current reminding them both that life moves forward, carrying grief and joy alike. One autumn evening, as leaves burned gold and crimson, Daniel and Claire walked hand in hand along the riverbank. The air was crisp, the water reflecting the fire of the sky. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" Claire asked softly. Daniel smiled. "I used to think the best years of my life were behind me, but now I think they're just beginning." She leaned against him, and together they watched the river flow, endless and unbroken. Epilogue. The River's Gift. Years later, townsfolk would remember Daniel and Claire as part of Millbrook's heart, the retired firefighter who carried stories of courage, the music teacher whose piano brought hope. Children grew, parents aged, and seasons turned, but their love endured, steady as the river that had first brought them together. The river had carried Daniel through loss, through fire, through uncertainty, and at last it carried him to where he belonged, beside Claire, in the town he called home, in the life he had once thought was over, but had only just begun. Because second chances weren't just possible. They were waiting for anyone brave enough to reach for them. The end. Subscribe